The literacy crisis is ruining everything and making things so miserable. It is everywhere you turn.
Kids do not know how to actually physically read a book. Kids do not know how to write in class.
Reading proficiency for U.S. fourth graders hit its record low last year, and implications for this are really vast.
20 years into teaching, and honestly, the students' abilities get lower every single year.
I'm genuinely terrified for this next generation of children.
We should not just be sticking an iPad in front of a kid or a cell phone. That's not okay.
I don't know if you're aware, but right now we're in the middle of the fastest literacy decline we've ever seen. And actually, I wasn't aware how insane and damaging this was to our society until pretty recently. Just for reference, in 1870, the same time we were letting kids work in factories and abusing child labor, the literacy rate was 11.5%, meaning that 88.5% of adults could read. Then in 1979, after years of advancement in technology, the literacy rate was 0.4%. So 99.6% of adults could read. At that point in time, it was the highest our literacy rates have ever been. It's pretty cool. But fast forward to now, 21% of adults in the US are considered illiterate or functionally illiterate. So really the only conclusion that I can draw from that is that we need to put kids back in factories, because what is going on?
I know it's an unpopular opinion, but hear me out on this one. Our society would benefit enormously from bringing back child labor.
How did we drop the rates of illiteracy down from 0.4% up to essentially 21%? Well, the boomer in me just wants to come out right away and say technology, which is fair. I mean, I think a lot of you would say that. I mean, come on, you can't see something like Italian brain rot and tell me that you think of intelligence when you see that.
We cannot explain what you are about to hear. Science doesn't know enough about the brain to make sense of.
And I think one of my biggest grievances with this is that kids these days are never going to experience the magic and adrenaline-inducing book that is The Magic Treehouse: Summer of the Sea Serpent. To be totally fair though, while technology does play a part in our inability to read, there's a little bit more to it than just that. And that's what I want to explore today. What exactly happened to literacy and how dangerous is that for society? In order to answer that, let's start from the beginning. Let's talk about what reading used to be. If we were to go back to the 1870s, for example, which I just want to mention again that child labor was all the rage those days.
Child labor, specifically. How freaking cool it is!
Reading was pretty much the primary way that information moved throughout society, whether it be laws, stories, or a comprehensive list of all 1,025 Pokemon species. In some form, in one way or another, it would be written down for you to read. It wasn't like US President Rutherford B. Hayes was just gonna record some kind of little TikTok dance and post it for everybody to see. Writing was all they had. All of that to say is that if you wanted to be at least somewhat of a functional and effective member of society, you had to know how to read. And if you're like me, the thought of being trapped in a society where reading is all you can do, it sounds a little bit boring. But I mean, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against reading. I actually do my fair share of it. Usually it's in the form of Instagram captions, but have you seen some of those captions? They are so long that they might as well be considered books. Anyways, while it might sound boring living in a society where reading is how you consume information, it does have its benefits.
Most people think the value of reading is in the ability to recite what you read. Chapter 1 this, chapter 2 that, but that's not how the mind works. The real power of reading does not lie in perfect recall, but in the reshaping of your thoughts. You may not remember the exact sentence, but when asked about a topic, your answer will be heavily influenced by the wisdom you consumed, because the book reformed an opinion you previously held. Ideas don't just sit in your mind to be called upon directly. Even if you can't say, Socrates taught me this, this, and this, he still shifted the architecture of the building that is your thoughts. So if you're reading philosophy and you can't list bullet points of the things that you've read, don't think that you're not ingesting the information. You are still becoming smarter, for the proof is not in what you can quote. Rather, it lies in your updated and assimilated patterns of thought.
Honestly, we could spend hours going through all the studies and talking about all the different ways that reading is beneficial for us, but that's a lot of words and I'm low on Subway Surfer clips at the moment. Basically, reading acted as a way of self-education, and if you multiply that by the majority of society, you get a lot of people learning a lot more. So if you were wondering why back in 1870 people didn't sell courses on how to get rich quickly through AI-generated art, that's why. People could learn how to do that on their own. So at that point, we lived in a thriving society that was filled with growth, knowledge, and critical thinking, getting to a point where 99.6% of people were literate. But what happens when we start to lose that? Let's talk about the decline of literacy. It's probably not going to come as a shock to you that there wasn't just some random magical moment where everybody stopped reading. It wasn't like we all collectively got together and had a little powwow and decided that we weren't going to read anymore. Obviously, that would never happen because, I mean, for one, people cannot agree on anything. The decline of literacy was something that happened slowly over time. And again, I know it's easy to say that technology did this to us, which I do love saying that because it's like 99% true, but it is a little deeper than that. And the truth is, the decline actually started before modern technology. And so if it wasn't technology, then what was it? Like I said a minute ago, it wasn't that people stopped reading overnight, so it's hard to pinpoint an exact moment where it happened, but there are a few moments from over the last few decades that I would consider to be some kind of inflection points. These are what I believe are big moments that led us to where we are now. The first moment was in the 1990s, almost immediately after our peak literacy rates. In the 1990s, we began to see that literacy rates were starting to plateau instead of improving as reading scores stopped making steady gains. But this was before social media, before smartphones, and before our current age of digital technology. So what happened? Well, I believe we reached what is called the power law of practice. Basically put, this is the idea that the logarithm of the reaction time for a particular task decreases linearly with the logarithm of the number of practice trials taken. I literally have no clue what I just said. I don't know. I have no idea. And if you are like me and you have no clue what I just read, basically what that means is that improvements are rapid at first and then decrease over time. For example, if I were to randomly decide that I wanted to be an NBA player and I gave myself 2 years of consistent practice to become good, I wouldn't have a consistent level of improvement throughout those 2 years. The first year of practice, I might see huge improvements as I learn to play at a higher level. But then that second year, I might see less improvements because I would have to put more effort into practice to learn even more difficult skills. And I believe that same principle is what is happening to reading and literacy. By the late 20th century, we had near universal schooling, widespread literacy, and some of the highest test scores we had ever seen. But by that time, we had already made the biggest historical gains that we could. So in order to get higher scores, we were gonna have to put more effort into it. Whether that meant moving toward a more individualized learning system, more time spent reading, or more educational support. And that's the first inflection point, which that is arguably the most important one because I think it sets the stage for the other inflection points. Which now, the rest of these inflection points involve technology, so we can go ahead and hop back on the technology hate train. All aboard. That was cringy. I would consider the next inflection point to be in the early to mid 2000s where we started gaining everyday access to the internet. During this point, things like forums, blogs, and overall shorter levels of reading started to rise. So reading started to move from this linear and focused activity to a more fragmented and short one. People went from reading these whole novels to reading fan fiction blogs, which I guess maybe you could argue that's where brain rot began. And I know we like to make fun of how weird the internet is now, but there was definitely a lot of really strange and really sus stuff coming out of the internet in those early days, primarily because it was pretty unmoderated. Then I would say the next major inflection point was the introduction of smartphones. I don't know if we need to talk about that too much because I think it's pretty obvious. We have short attention spans now. And that's because of how much access to information we have and how fast-paced everything is. 1 second I could be reading about World War II, then 5 seconds later I could start playing Candy Crush, and then I could follow that up by watching a bunch of book talk thirst trap videos.
Why do all the attractive men have thousands of followers? I'm trying to shoot my shot. Dang it. Brick by brick. I'm gonna miss you when I scroll.
And the amazing part is I could do all of that in 30 seconds flat. If I were to do that for an entire day, do you have any idea how many book talk thirst trap videos that would be? I would be putting up MVP levels of book talk thirst trap watching time. On that topic though, there actually is a little bonus inflection point I wanna add, and that would be COVID. There have been like a million, billion, trillion different videos talking about how COVID affected the literacy rates.
Everyone is shocked to hear that middle schoolers can't write, but did you all ever think that, hello, they were in like first grade, second grade, kindergarten during COVID when they were supposed to learn how to write? They were stuck on a computer writing, you know, parents were working from home, parents were working, like there's a huge gap in knowledge, and we are now starting to see the effects of that 5 years later.
I don't want to spend too much time on it, but basically it made us dumber. With the introduction of remote learning, disrupted routines, and unprecedented levels of absolute brain rot, the decline in literacy started accelerating. And so between all of those things, we've gotten to a point where we are at historically low levels of literacy. And here's a few stats supporting that you may find interesting. In 2023, 28% of US adults scored at or below level 1 literacy, indicating significant difficulty with everyday reading tasks. 29% of US adults scored at level 2 literacy, showing basic reading proficiency but challenges with complex texts. 44% of US adults scored at level 3 literacy or above, indicating strong reading and comprehension skills. And then 21% of US adults are classified as functionally illiterate, unable to complete basic reading tasks. Which maybe it's just me, but that sounds like a ton. That is a lot of functionally illiterate people.
I was talking to one of our church kids and he very boldly told me, yeah, I don't know how to read and neither does anybody in my class. Mind you, this kid is starting 5th grade in August, okay? And I thought he was playing, so I told him, you know kids will do anything for money. So I was like, I'll give you $10 if you could tell me what this bag says. It said chips in giant letters. And I said, you could sound it out, you could try spelling it or whatever to help you read it. Cause I thought he was lying. So this dude goes, CHIPS. And I go, what does that say? And he goes, potatoes. Y'all, we're cooked as a society.
And as much as I'd love to say we're turning things around, things are looking good, and everything is hunky-dory, I don't think I can say that. One of the reasons being I have no idea what hunky-dory means other than it being synonymous with good, and the second reason being that it seems like this whole issue is becoming worse with the next generation. Let's talk about the Gen Alpha literacy crisis. Being the generation born between 2010 and 2025, Gen Alpha was the first generation raised with smart technology before books. Their whole life is pretty much the algorithm, and honestly, it shows. I personally feel like the amount of brain rot I've experienced on the internet has exponentially increased since Gen Alpha became old enough to gain sentience. For example, can you imagine if somebody in the 1950s came up with Skibbity Toilet? I have a feeling if someone did that, the CIA would literally kidnap them to conduct psychological tests on them. You only get brain rot like that if only 30% of the 4th graders in your generation are proficient in reading. That is some illiterate brain rot. And while it's all fun and games to make fun of Gen Alpha, it actually does have some pretty negative effects on them. Recently, I saw a video where a teacher was talking about this and her experience with it.
This is the literacy crisis that you keep seeing on TikTok and that people are like, there's no literacy crisis, you just need to be a teacher. I am a stinking teacher. I do my job. I do my job.
It was on the board when my students came in today. It gives them every single resource that we've been using. It tells them that 1, they're running their introduction and what exactly that looks like, color coordinated with the example we've been looking at. Then it says 2, you're running body paragraph 1A, it says what that is, and then color coordinates with the example essay.
In addition to that, we also have, I've color coordinated, so like pink goes to pink on the board, purple goes to purple on the board, all the colors match. We filled all of this out, all of it, together. They just had to take our notes and turn them into sentences using the example on the board and all 4 of the resources that we have looked at together, gone in depth with together, or created together over the probably 3 or 4 weeks we've been looking at this. So we had 80 minutes. That was on the board when they came in. I walked around basically the entire time, helping them. I'm an 8th grade English teacher. Think about when you were in 8th grade. You come to class, you're given a prompt, and you just, you would just write. You know, we weren't typing anything. I don't know what else I can do.
I didn't include the whole video, but she does go into great detail and great lengths to explain how in-depth she made her explanation for her students, and yet most of them still didn't finish the assignment. I feel like right off the bat, that is a pretty tangible way we can see how literacy has declined in the United States. And I'm definitely not the most illiterate or smart person in the world, but when I was in 8th grade, we had to write a whole essay in 60 minutes about some weird abstract concept like the socioeconomic aspects of friendship. And you better believe we did it. Did we have to make stuff up? Sure we did, but we raw dogged those essays with nothing but our pencils, prayers, and prefrontal cortexes. But just in case you didn't think that was bad enough, it gets worse. It's not just the literacy rates of Gen Alpha, but their overall intelligence. Because of our current system, because of social media, and because of technology, Gen Alpha is not only having a harder time reading, but they also have a lower IQ too, as opposed to a lower IQ 1.
Okay, so there has now been actual studies shown that, you know, the brain rot of like the skibbity toilets and all that is actually affecting Gen Alpha's IQ. The Flynn effect basically states that every generation after the previous one, the average IQ will increase. From millennials to Gen Z, it was about a 35-point increase in IQ. However, comparing Gen Z to Gen Alpha, they're calling it the reverse Flynn effect. The average IQ of a Gen Alpha compared to Gen Z is anywhere from 40 to 60 points lower than Gen Z. That means that the IQ of Gen Alpha is completely screwed, and they've basically reached the point where they're intellectually disabled. That's not like an exaggeration at all. A decrease of 40 to 60 puts them in the high 90s to mid 80s. That makes them intellectually disabled. That basically means that Gen Z is the smartest generation ever. Late 90s, early 2000s, on top.
To be fair, I did end up trying to find the study he was talking about, and I could only find one saying that IQ as a whole, regardless of age, has been lowering since the introduction of smartphones. But even so, that still really doesn't look good for Gen Alpha when you take into account their literacy rates, or I should say their declining literacy rates. One of the parts that's most scary about this too is that this is the generation that's gonna eventually be in charge of our country and our world. The same people who are 6-7ing all over the place are gonna be the same people responsible for our fiscal and social policy. And I already know when that time comes around, those debates are gonna be absolutely wild. Like imagine you're presenting your economic plan, then your opponent pulls out a video of you cosplaying as Italian brain rot. Realistically, our president may one day be an iPad kid. I'm not sure I'm ready for that. Like I said before though, we're becoming more illiterate as a whole. And maybe that doesn't seem like a big deal to you, but it has some pretty negative downsides. Let's talk about the consequences of illiteracy. As shocking as it may be to hear, an illiterate society usually doesn't produce better results than a literate one. And maybe you're thinking this is some kind of non-issue because we've survived as a society with lower IQs and lower literacy rates, but here's the key difference. Our current system is built with the assumption that we're already literate, but because we're getting less literate, we're gonna start paying for it. Literally. In a study done by the Cutest Kids Early Intervention Organization, illiteracy accounts for $2.2 trillion in taxpayer losses throughout the year. Just for reference, our budget deficit in 2025 was $1.8 trillion. So presumably, if our literacy rate was higher, we could have a budget surplus. And speaking of the economy, the literacy crisis doesn't just affect our budget, but our economic productivity. Adults with low literacy are positioned to have lower wages, unstable employment, and more likely to work dead-end jobs. That's not even to mention that lower literacy rates are also correlated with lower voter turnout and the overall simplification of society. And that's on a macro level. But what about if we look at it at an individual level? Like I mentioned before, adults with low literacy are more likely to have lower wages and unstable employment. That's on top of having poorer health outcomes and lower social mobility. So all of that to say is that this low literacy crisis isn't just affecting society as a whole, but also the individuals. I actually don't know if I can think of a single upside to having low literacy. Except maybe that more people will watch my videos, but that's more of a secondary thing. That's not really my focus. But if it does happen, it's not the worst thing in the world. And I'm gonna be honest with you too, this issue does feel a little bit overwhelming. Like, where do you even start with something like this? But just because it's overwhelming, it doesn't mean it's hopeless. If I'm being honest, I don't think this happened because kids stopped caring, or because parents as a whole failed, or even because teachers gave up. I think it happened because of the environment we created. I like to believe that most people are intelligent, curious, and capable, and I think that's still true. Struggling to read doesn't mean that anybody is a broken human. It just means that the environment didn't support them. Honestly, I don't even think it's that we necessarily need to fix anything, but more so protect something that we value. We need to protect the patience, attention, and presence that comes from reading. Maybe it could be as simple as reading a few pages of something before we go to sleep. Maybe it just takes a little bit of intentionality. That focus on protecting the value that is literacy doesn't mean we have to give up everything else. We just have to make space for it.